And I'm joined now in our studio by the interim leader of the Conservative Party, Ron Ambrose. Good to see you again.
You too.
Thanks for being here. Your party's been pressing for government action on this file for months now, and today the motion finally passed.
Yeah,
and
what a great
it's
day.
One of those, you know, when you're a CPAC, when you're on CPAC and you're a CPAC watcher, you follow proceedings very closely in the House, and you don't often see this kind of unity and this kind of emotion in the House. But it was an emotional day, and let me start with the motion itself. What exactly does it compel the government to do?
Well, it compels the government to recognize that a genocide is happening to the Yazidi people. It also compels the government to recognize a report that was tabled in the United Nations that has recommendations calling on countries to fulfill particular things to do that would help the not only address the genocide, but also help the Yazidi people in particular. And then it also calls on the government, which was most important to myself, but also to Michelle and to other people in our caucus, because we've been working on this for a number of months, was calling on the government to not just come back to the House with a report, but actually offer asylum to these women and girls that have been sex slaves and have been rescued or have escaped and need a safe place and need a safe haven. So we've asked the government, and they've agreed. So today was a fantastic day. You're right. It was a very proud day for all of us, and a good day for Canada.
What do Canadians need to know about Yazidis, and in particular Yazidi women and girls?
Well, the Yazidis themselves are an ancient culture. They even predate Christianity. They have an incredible history, and they are, by population, a fairly small people, and they have been living in this area of Kurdistan in Iraq for literally centuries, for thousands of years, but they have been persecuted many times over those years, but most recently by ISIS. ISIS has declared war on Yazidis, and now the United Nations has recognized this, and now Parliament has as well here in Canada, has committed genocide against the Yazidis. They want to wipe them out. I mean, if you listen to what Nadia Murad, as you know, she was here today, great spokesperson, a survivor herself of being a sex slave and held captive by ISIS, describes when they came to her village, people were given 2 minutes. The men were killed, and the women and girls were taken away to become sex slaves. I mean, horrific what these women have gone through and survived through. And so whether they've escaped or they've been rescued, they're now in refugee camps. But sadly, this is another issue. They're not being processed, they're not being prioritized or even processed through the United Nations refugee camps appropriately. So countries have literally had to step in and really target these group of women and girls and help them get out to safety, to get the proper counseling support that they were going to need to start a new life. Germany has done that. Germany has successfully brought over 1,000 Yazidi women and girls to Germany. Australia has also done it. So that's another thing that the government has now committed to bring these women and girls here.
You've raised a number of different things that I want to drill down a bit on, but let's start there with numbers. Mr. McCallum, we heard today, couldn't say exactly how many or when they would start being brought to Canada and given asylum, although the motion says within 4 months, and it sounds like the government's committed to that. So let's start there with a timeline. Should it take 4 months?
You know, I mean, I wish it had already happened. I mean, the first question I asked was on International Women's Day, which was March 8th of this year, and we knew there was a mechanism for the government to do this at any moment. And I, I'm not going to belabor it, but I'll never understand why we couldn't just do it. But we didn't. So we had to keep pushing, and now the government says they will do it. We wanted it to happen in 30 days. They said they couldn't, so we gave them 120 days. But they do have the capacity, and they have the resources, they have the power and the authority to make this happen.
Right. So if the UN isn't in these camps, if the UN isn't actually sort of setting these Yazidis aside for processing, how does Canada do it? Should we go over there? Should we go find them and select them and pick them and bring them back?
Well, that's one thing we can do, and we do have personnel on the ground. But the other thing is there are also organizations. One of them was here with us today, led by a young man named Murad Ismail, and their organization is called Yazidi. That's just one non-for-profit NGO that's working with the Yazidis around the genocide to help get these women and girls out of Iraq and into safety, and even identify them in some of the refugee camps to get them out and get them to Germany, for instance. So he mentioned today that they've already interviewed 1,097 women and girls. Right. So they've identified people already that could be placed on a priority list to get away and to get here, hopefully, to Canada to safety.
Is that the number you have in mind? Is it 1,000? Is it a couple of thousand? 3,000?
I don't have a number in mind. I think we need a program, and I think we need to start making Canada a safe haven and a place that women and girls can come to and seek asylum. And that's the key here, is that Canada is a place where women and girls can come to, that we have a program in place to take them in. And look, when Germany did this, people took up the offer, and they have over 1,000 women and girls. When you think about the fact that there was about 5,000 to 7,000 women taken captive, they think there's still about 3,000 at least that are still being held as sex slaves by ISIS fighters. I think we can do our part.
Okay. Let me move on to a couple of other topics in the time we have left. CETA. What more should the federal government be doing? Should the Prime Minister be doing to try and get this deal across the finish line by this? And it's not clear whether just how important this deadline of Thursday is, but is he doing enough?
Well, I go back to the beginning when the Trade Minister was asked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and she said, "It's not my job to promote trade agreements," which is a really strange thing for a trade minister to say. I've since seen her get obviously more involved, particularly in the European Union trade agreement, but even going back before this happened, Prime Minister Trudeau mentioned the European Union trade agreement once in the House of Commons. It's just right from the beginning we've been going after the government because there's just been a lack of even talk about the importance of free markets and free trade. And we always had a very aggressive free trade agenda under Mr. Harper, because there was a recognition that we're a large country in geography, small in population, and we have to open up markets for our businesses. And as you know, we negotiated dozens of free trade agreements. With the EU agreement, there'd be agreements with 51 countries. So, but the most important thing about this agreement is it's 80,000 jobs, 80,000 new jobs for Canadians. So it's really important at a time when we're looking at slow growth, we're looking at unemployment in certain parts of the country. And so we do need the Prime Minister to step up. So yes, we've been pushing him on taking more of a leadership role. I think it's not just about making sure that all hands are on deck. If he needs finance minister, if he needs himself, the trade minister, the energy minister, every minister at his disposal to go to Europe to make the case in Brussels. I mean, I think that show...
It's not so much Europe. I mean, it's Wallonia. He's got to go convince 3.5 million people. And is there the possibility that if a Canadian delegation, including the Prime Minister, shows up there and says, to borrow a phrase from past times, this is a no-brainer, people. Like, take it. Maybe they go, you know what? Mind your business. We're dealing with this.
There's lots of times in trade agreements where there's challenges, and there were a lot of times in the 7 years of the CETA negotiations, it's 28 countries that we thought it wouldn't go through, and we just persevered. And there's times where they're stalling, and you have to take back the challenge up again. But I do think, though, I really think the Prime Minister needs to actually show leadership and get out and talk about it. I mean, Jean Charest said today, he said, Prime Minister should pick up the phone, call Angela Merkel, call Hollande in France. I mean, it's not just us. There's 27 other countries, well, 28, I mean, because Belgium actually wants this free trade agreement. There's just this small group of people in Belgium that don't. And they all actually need us to also make the case. So I think there's an opportunity here for the Prime Minister to show leadership. I don't think there's anything wrong with him getting on a plane and going over there and seeing if there's anything that he can do to help. And I think the other issue is I also like to see him in Canada talk about free trade. Right. There's a really, I think, scary anti-trade populist agenda out there that is that really has an opportunity to undermine a lot of the incredible work that's been done on free trade, the benefits of free trade that are really important to Canada. And I think he needs to be very vocal and frankly, I think every leader in Canada, but most importantly him, has to be very vocal on the benefits of free trade. This agreement alone is 80,000 jobs. And we cannot let ourselves be, I think, be silenced by some of this very strong populist anti-free trade sentiment that's out there. And I hope in no way he's listening to that.
All right, Ron Ambrose, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.